what we're seeing is folks are doing, heroic, visionary organizing around climate, around addressing, these attacks on our democracy, around housing and eviction, and so I see in this Kairos moment, God speaking that change is possible.
Right there, it would have been a nice time for the drop right here.
We can do this here, watch me rock the flow. Killing it a must, never optional.
Spent guys at the crab table, still ain't signed to a rap label. DVD when I ain't have cable. I got balls, he ain't rap label. A 6D for me is man fatal. Can't see me like a bad angle.
Absolutely, ain't going nowhere. We will be forever and ever and ever.
Peace, beautiful family. This is Dr. Walter Hidalgo, and this is the Know Thy Shelf podcast. The Know Thy Shelf podcast utilizes the metaphor of the shelf in order to extrapolate the self. And the way we do that is we invite guests to come in and share something about themselves. And before I introduce my guests, I just want to tell people to check out the website. Go to www.knowthyshelf.tv. If you're looking for workshops for teens and young adults, any coaching, definitely go to the website and check it out. And if you're looking for something to share to that young person, definitely check out my book, Beyond the Four Walls, The Rising Ministry and Spirituality of Hip Hop. The next thing we always do is we like to shout out a group of individuals. And today I'm going to give a real big shout out to all of my ministers, especially my women ministers, and all of that umbrella. To all my activists, because what is an activist? Someone that activates the community. Because there are a lot of people sleeping. A lot of people sleeping. I want to give a big shout out to anybody that practices what they preach. So I'm holding you, minister, accountable right now, right? Because I got somebody here that I admire, that I respect, and that I'm so proud of. The Reverend Doctor Liz Theoharis. What's up, my sister?
It's so good to be with you.
What a blessing. Thank you so much. And where are we?
We are here at Union Theological Seminary, where the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice is housed in Harlem, New York.
Yeah, that's right. I spent a couple of years of my life here. Well, actually more, if you think about it. But I want to get back to that, but not now. But as we always do, I like to contextualize things. So if we were to go back into Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures, you seen that movie? When he goes back in time? And we were to jump into, go visit a young herb, Liz. What would we see? What would we hear? Because you're originally from?
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yo, shout out to the mill, yo. I know, shout out to all my people from the mill, yo. Much love, yes. Talk to us about that.
I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in a family that was dedicated to doing the work of social justice. I am the granddaughter of immigrants. My mom's family came to the U.S. Escaping the Armenian genocide. And my father's family came to the U.S. Looking for the American dream that actually was more of a nightmare in terms of poverty and in terms of despair and violence. And so my dad was raised in Milwaukee, and he raised me and my siblings there. And I still have a lot of love for the Midwest and for the people out in Milwaukee, across Wisconsin, who hold out both this idea that some of the most progressive, revolutionary, visionary things have come. I mean, we had the best public park system of almost anywhere in the country. We had, all kinds of culture and art and programming, really, that was funded by the state, funded by public resources. But also Wisconsin is the home to some of the most reactionary elements in U.S. history. John Birch Society, McCarthy himself, folks that introduced the welfare reform law of the 1990s and introduced a lot of the voter suppression we're still seeing today. And so, it's a place of contradiction. It's both where lots of folks are constantly striving to make their lives and the world better, but there's all these forces that want us, divided and dispirited,
Right.
so that we can't actually realize the true potential of ourselves and our world.
Yeah, it's interesting when I think about, how much our environment, where we're from, plays a role in who we are and what we do. When I went to Milwaukee, I always say this with all due respect, but wow, you talk about the blatant racism and the transparent lines that exist. And this is my friend giving me the tour.
That's right.
Because the first place I went to was Chicago. That's a whole different monster. But these younger, smaller cities, they get overshadowed by the big ones, but they are actually microcosms, representations of a much more bigger, broader issue that's out there, you know?
I mean, Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in the country. And just has, deep poverty, deep inequality. I mean, they were attacking the public schools in Milwaukee long before they were attacking a lot of other places. But then there's all these folk that are out there trying to make Milwaukee, trying to make Wisconsin, trying to make this nation and world a better place. And, I got to be raised amongst folks that were just like every day waking up thinking, how are we going to both connect our issues, not just to other parts of the city, not just to other parts of the state, but across the world. And folks that were using their faith actually to do a lot of that work.
That's right. And I think that's a good segue right into the next piece right here, because, we're here at Union Theological Seminary. Shout out. Columbia University, shout out. Teachers, Barnard, that whole network. Jewish Theological, diagonally across from us, right?
For sure.
And, I always tell people, the Walter before Union and the Walter after. 360, I am not who I thought I was. Right? That's me. Here I'm thinking one thing and they turn me upside down. They start flipping the tables, right?
That's right.
What drew you to Union? What did you study?
Yeah.
And how has your theology informed the work that you do?
Yeah, so again, I was raised in a very religiously and an active family. And so I was actually introduced to Union both because of its place in the world in terms of helping to kind of bring liberation theology, to these yet to be United States, but also because actually the first time I ever stepped foot at Union had nothing to do with the school. It was that we were doing a month-long march from Washington, D.C., from the filing a petition to the Inter-American Commission, indicting the U.S. government for human rights abuses because of welfare reform and NAFTA. And then we marched all the way from Washington, D.C. to New York, and who welcomed us when we got, those 20 miles a day for 30 days, who welcomed us was faculty and staff and students at Union. And we were in James Chapel and in some of the other spaces that are here still on this campus, speaking 11 languages, including American Sign Language, with poor and homeless and dispossessed people from across the United States and across the whole Western Hemisphere. It was this called the March of the Americas. And then a couple years later, when I was realizing that my kind of call to organize a movement to end poverty was actually a religious one, I then thought about Union. And it was because of being welcomed here. And I was able to come because I got a scholarship in honor of William Sloane Coffin, who was one of the kind of fathers, quote unquote, of the peace and justice movement, who was someone I actually knew as a young child. He had stayed at my family's house when he would come to Milwaukee, talking about all kinds of peace and justice kinds of issues. And so I came to Union and did a Master's of Divinity, and then actually did a PhD in biblical studies. And I think a lot of the reason I ended up looking at the Bible and what the Bible really says about poverty and justice was because, since I've been pretty young, I've been doing very grassroots anti-poverty organizing. And almost not a week goes by in my life when someone doesn't quote the Bible to justify inaction in the face of poverty. You know, the poor you shall always have with you, or if you do not work, you shall not eat, or you know, those who have will be given more, and those who have, you know, what little they have will be taken away. You know, just and so many more. And I started to realize that if I was serious, and if our movement of poor and dispossessed people were serious about actually building from the bottom up and helping to realize a reign of justice and abundance and, you know, truth and love to everyone, that we had some real obstacles in the way that people were traditionally interpreting the Bible and what the Bible really said. And so I, you know, studied with various folks here and was really transformed in my understanding of what we're called to do as people of faith, especially when it comes to issues of racism, when it comes to issues of poverty, when it comes to the destruction of our earth and everything that's living in and on it, and this false narrative of kind of what is often titled, you know, white Christian nationalism. This narrative that blames immigrants and poor folk and people of color and queer folk and women and kind of anyone for all of society's problems, a narrative that kind of pits us against each other and that feeds us this lie of scarcity, like saying this is as good as it gets, you know, we can't do anything better than this, you know, if God wanted to end poverty and racism, he would do so, right? When in fact that is, you know, completely heretical to our actual sacred teachings and texts.
Yeah, who are some of those giants that inspired you to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was both, you know, professors at Union, you know, folks like Brigitte Call, who was my PhD advisor,
shout out, yes,
who taught me, you know, about how you can read the Bible, you know, from the underside of history, and that you don't have to throw out the parts that you don't like. You can put them in the context and put them in your own context and see what they really are saying about injustice and about idolatry. You know, I was deeply impacted by James Cone, by Vincent Winbush.
Shout out to Dr. Cone, legend.
Yeah,
rest
for
in
sure.
peace. Wow.
Right.
I'm glad I had the chance to see him before he... Yeah.
I mean, my first day at Union was, or my first day of his class, systematic theology, was 9/11. And so that really shaped my whole experience, you know, in seminary. But it shaped it both by being totally impacted by these brilliant scholars and theologians, but it was also shaped by, you know, grassroots leaders that I was coming into contact with who had basically sent me to seminary from a welfare rights movement, from the homeless union movement, who said, you know, we got to figure out this question about how do we build a movement, much like that early Christian movement, you know, from the ground up, that is led by those that are most impacted by imperialism and injustice and poverty. And so, you know, even my experience on 9/11, you know, so many of my classmates were so shaken by 9/11, and it was, you know, people were directly impacted, right? I mean, folks had, you know, knew people or had family members working in the trade towers. Folks had folks on planes, including some of the ones that were, you know, at one point we thought were being targeted. But what I realized was that many of my classmates, and by no means all, but many, you know, had a faith that was rooted that mostly good things had happened to them. And that their faith was that good things were going to continue to happen. But, you know, where I was coming from, out of, you know, homeless encampments in North Philadelphia or you know, tomato fields in Immokalee, Florida, where people, you know, had been beaten down, you know, kind of the ground zero of racism and of poverty in the society, folks had a faith that even though only bad things had ever happened to them in their lives, that coming together, organizing together, things might be able to change. And so I feel like I was really both able to sit in the courses and in the kind of lectures of these amazing theologians, but then also march on the streets and sit in classrooms with poor and low-income folk and struggle through what does a kind of theology of liberation look for in our day? What does reading the Bible with the poor look like for our situations? What kind of theology and kind of real moral leaders of our day are coming out of poor and impacted folk? And what does it say about, where God is in this world and in our struggles for justice and what we should be doing?
That's right.
And so I feel like, I had an amazing time at Union. I've stayed connected to Union. I've never been connected to an institution for any time, let alone, this is more than 20 years. But, and I think it's because there are so many Union alums and so many leaders that have come into contact with this amazing institution that are really, helping to bring God's reign of justice out into the world in the here and now. Like on earth, not
as it is
as
in
it is in heaven, right?
That's right. Anna, how's it looking? Good. Thank you. This is another great segue because I think it's so important. So as you said, we're here at Union Theological Seminary at the Kairos Center, right? For those that don't know that word Kairos, God's time, the opportune time. It's the moment, God's moment, as opposed to the chronos, which is more linear and chronological. What's God telling us right now?
I mean, I think what we see is that, as Kairos tells us, old structures of injustice are breaking down, and new movements for change are breaking through. And I think, what is it that Reverend Doctor King says, that it's when it's, darkest at night that we can see the stars. And I think, there's a lot going on right now in our society and in our nation and our world that is not okay, right? We live in the richest country in human history, and almost half of the population lives in poverty or just a little bit away, a couple $100 emergency away from absolute economic ruin, right? We're living through the biggest attack on our democracy since the Civil War and Reconstruction. I mean, we're, seeing that the planet is being destroyed by the fossil fuel corporations, by these huge polluters, and causing extreme weather events and climate change, and that's impacting poor people first and worst, right? We're seeing wars, dozens of wars, just ongoing in our society, and since 9/11, since I was a first year student in James Cone's class. I mean, we as a nation, the United States of America, has spent $21 trillion on militarism, on border security, on war, on kind of militarizing our communities with police and tanks and all this stuff, right? So it's not good. Things are people are hurting. We lived through the worst public health crisis in generations, in a century, and we haven't expanded healthcare in any significant way. We haven't raised low-wage workers, minimum wage to a living wage, even though we gave folk a new title and called them essential, but we still treat them as expendable, right? I mean, so
Speak
this
on it.
and this and this, right? Just so much. But what we also see is that, weeks after, days after, months after George Floyd was murdered, another black man murdered by police, like hundreds are every year. You had in 3,000 communities across the country people organizing movement for Black Lives protests, right? What we see is that, the Poor People's Campaign that I helped to co-chair and found, has organized the largest gathering of poor and low-income people in U.S. history. What we're seeing is folks are doing, heroic, visionary organizing around climate, around addressing, these attacks on our democracy, around around housing and eviction, and so I see in this Kairos moment, God speaking that change is possible.
Peace, 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 beautiful family. This is Dr. Walter. If you like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe. Also, if you like the way this video is edited, shoot us an email at knowthyselftv@gmail.com. We have price packages for short videos, long-term videos. It definitely helps to promote your business, your brand, and yourself. Peace.
Ending poverty, overcoming racism is possible. And any minute more that we experience those things means another minute that God is enraged, and we are being disobedient to God's will for abundance and justice for all. And so I think we kind of can hold both those contradictions, like at the same time, like both that things are not okay, but with God's help and with powerful organizing led by those, as Frederick Douglass tells us, those who would be free must strike the first blow, right? Those in pain know when their pain is relieved. So you have poor and impacted folk, helping to lead the way to real change in our society. And I see it everywhere. I was in Florida yesterday. I was in Georgia a couple days before that. I was in Mississippi a couple weeks before that. I'm seeing amazing, real heroes and heroines that we don't really hear about in our mainstream media, right?
Yes.
But who are fighting every day to make life better for them and their families and their communities and their present and their future, and they're winning.
Yeah, and as if all that you said wasn't enough, and then we get hit with COVID.
I know, right?
And my question for you is, what is the role of the church now, given the reality of what COVID has really exposed, the level of transparency of the economic disconnect that's out there, health system, all those things that you mentioned. But then COVID comes and wow, like we really got put in our knees. So any thoughts behind that?
Well, before COVID hit, in the richest country in human history, and I think it's important for us to remember this, like this is not a nation that doesn't have the resources to build a prefab house in 45 minutes or feed everybody, right? Or make sure we have good education for all of our kids, or have medical, equipment and care, right? I mean, again, so we are not experiencing scarcity, like, but before COVID hit, there were 250,000 people dying from poverty every year. 700 people a day, 750. It means that we had gotten used to death and to kind of devastation, and what was normal was exactly that, was violence and despair and economic precarity, right? And so what COVID did was just further expose and deepen, these kind of fissures, as public health experts have kind of said to us, existed, those fissures of racism, those fissures of inequality, the lack of healthcare. I mean, 87 million people in this country before COVID didn't have healthcare insurance or had inadequate healthcare. And again, we haven't really expanded healthcare since. And in fact, the little bit of Medicaid expansion that has taken place is about to be taken away. If many of our politicians will have their way, but not the will of the people. And so to me, what COVID did was just further expose the kind of the death dealing system that we live in, and show, on the one hand, how interconnected we are, right? Like if anybody isn't making a living wage and they have to go and work, even if they're sick, then everyone could get sick. If anyone doesn't have health care, then everyone's impacted. If anyone, doesn't have a place to live, then, that everyone's impacted. It showed that. But our response, especially our governmental response, was wholly inadequate and just left us to kind of fend for ourselves. And just, went back to this kind of deserving and undeserving of poor or whose lives matter, right? Whose healthcare should we prioritize? Like, whose wages should we raise? And these kinds of things. And so I think that COVID wasn't anything new. It was just
ain't that the truth though too? Though
it was just like a deepening of what already was existing. But it also does, I think, for the church, show a way out. And that's just that we can't just like pretend like everything's okay, and that we can't ignore the real economic, political, and social needs of the majority of people, and that it has to be the work of the church alongside of the larger society and advocating, but it has to be the work of the church to actually kind of lift from the bottom so that everybody can rise, and to call out our elected officials, and to call out our communities, and to call out everybody, saying, guess what? It doesn't have to be this way. Guess what? It costs our society more to have the level of inequality that we have than it would be to end poverty right now as we know it. Guess what? We in the first week of COVID bailed out the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve bailed out Wall Street to the tune of $1.5 trillion, right?
Yeah,
I mean, more money than to cancel all student loans, right? And we found the money to bail out Wall Street, but now we have to have this whole debate about whether students should have to, be indebted for the rest of their lives just because they were trying to get an education. Like it's this kind of pitting of people and this saying that we just can't do it. I think that's been exposed, and what we saw, through some of the social programs that were expanded and extended in COVID, we saw that public policy works, right? When they started just that one child tax credit, right? That lifted 4 million kids above the poverty line, just with one little thing. It didn't cost the society almost much of anything, right? And then, and it worked, and people's lives were better. Kids were going to after school programs and doing dance classes. Folks didn't have to worry so much about meeting, their basic utility bills or food, right? It works. It's not that people are poor because they're lazy and crazy and stupid and are spending their money the wrong way. It's because we have a structure that keeps people impoverished. But guess what? Public policy works. And then what they do is they go about and they decide not to extend that program. And they decide to end the pandemic unemployment insurance kind of programs. They decide to stop the moratorium on eviction and utility shutoffs, despite the fact that nothing bad happened when they weren't evicting people. But now they go back to evicting people, and we're about to see the worst housing crisis we've seen in our lives, right?
This is a fact.
And so COVID taught us that we have solutions. We can even implement them. They even work, but we're choosing not to do it. And so that, I think, is a message for our churches that are we going to be a prophetic institution in this moment that needs some prophecy, because it surely does.
That's right. And you were involved in the creation of this book called Always With Us, what Jesus really said about the poor. And you mentioned a scriptural reading. Are the poor always going to be among us?
Well, I mean, Jesus says, and God says, and the Bible says that they will be if we're disobedient to God, and if we, don't raise wages and don't invest in social programs and refuse to cancel debts and refuse to pay workers a living wage and keep people enslaved to injustice and slavery, right? But it's not because it's inevitable. It's not because God wills it. It's because our nations are organized in the wrong way that keep poverty with us always. Right. But if we were to actually do God's will, if we were to actually, do what's possible, then no, ending poverty is beyond possible. It's in fact, it's better for the health of the economy and society. I mean, the United States spends $1 trillion every year on kids being poor, right? To actually wipe out child poverty, way less expensive, right? But right now we have a system, an economic system that really, where a very small number of individuals and corporations make a whole lot of money off of the kind of poverty of a whole lot of people. But for us to put God in that, saying that that's God's doing, that it's inevitable, that if God wanted to end poverty, he would do so, that is anathema. That is blasphemy. Because then you're saying that God didn't create enough. You're saying that God doesn't actually, every life isn't sacred. Then you're saying that somehow that God would discriminate against this beautiful creation when it's so clear that who's doing the discrimination is us humans.
That's right.
And especially those that are benefiting from the suffering of people.
That's right. Because at the end,
God said, and when it was created, it was good.
It was good. It was good.
And look at what we did
It was
to
good.
it.
And exactly, and then in that midst of that creation, God creates Sabbath, Jubilee, release, like justice, right? I mean, it's not just like a break. It's not just a vacation, though we all need those. But it's the kind of the way. What is good also is the maintenance of justice. And
It's like a
right
social check-in.
relationship.
It's a social check-in with
That's
each
right.
other.
That's
I really
right.
appreciate
That's
that.
right. That's exactly right. And when that isn't happening, when debts aren't being canceled and programs of social uplift aren't being put forward, then we are out of sync with God. And so we can put it on other people and we can put it on God, but it's on our societies, it's on our nations, it's on our elected leaders that we have the kind of level of injustice and inequality that we have.
As we always do in the Know Thyself podcast, we invite guests to share something that comes from their shelf. What you got for us today,
All right,
Beth?
I have this cross. It is made out of olive wood, and it's from Armenia. And so I'm Armenian.
From the Genesis, coming
exactly.
back, yeah.
And so Armenia was the first Christian nation.
Facts, yes, this is true.
It was the, we had one of the earliest written languages, in the world. And again, as I kind of said at the very beginning of this, I come from Armenian genocide survivors. From folks that were very clear to kind of instill in me a sense that of justice, a sense of truth and of love and of honoring and lifting up life, and a clarity that the reason that genocide happened, much like many genocides and other acts of violence happens, is when we're out of sync with how things are supposed to be. And so I'm very, proud of my Armenian heritage.
Shout out to Armenia.
That's
Everybody
right.
from Armenia.
That's
we are
right.
here. Yes.
Exactly. And I think it helped put me on a path, my upbringing, where I get to, live at this intersection of justice and spirituality, of religion and rights, of dignity and, kind of lifting from the bottom so everybody rises. And so I wear this always, and I got to visit Armenia once. It's actually for a social movement gathering, and that's when I got it. It's from the cathedral, kind of the biggest church, the oldest church in Armenia.
Rev, we throw that word that it sounds so sexy, and we romanticize this social justice.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think about, from a perspective of faith and then from the Bible, there's a number of words that talk about justice and righteousness and truth, and they're all linked to everybody getting to thrive and not just barely survive, right? And they're all linked to, God announcing good news, not the bad news of eviction, not the bad news of the lack of health care, not, violence and police violence and shootings and paying more honor to guns than kids, right? I mean, and so I love that, in our texts, we have a series of different words that mean, justice, the righting of wrongs, the right relationship, the canceling of debts, the paying of just wages, the ensuring that no one has too little and no one has too much. And so I think that social justice is it shouldn't be something to the side. It shouldn't be, a little exception. It shouldn't be, that's some nice work you're doing. It should be at the absolute center and core of everything our society is about, everything that our church is about, everything that higher ed is about, because it's about people's lives and livelihoods being to their fullest potential.
Yeah. So you are a minister. You're a mother. You're an activist. You, as the young people say, you outside. Right? You are out there. What's one piece of advice you would give that young person who's trying to follow your footsteps?
Well, I hope they're following their own footsteps and
Exactly.
maybe marching alongside a bunch of us that are out there in the streets having to call out the injustice in our day. I think that the main message I have for anyone, my own kids, but also anyone at any stage of their lives, but especially young people, is that when we look at history, it is so clear that young people have to lead us. Not in a patronizing kind of way, not in this like abdication, I'm not going to do my part and I'm going to leave all these problems to you kind of way, but that in the forefront of movements for change and transformation and kind of reconstruction from the bottom up, we all have a role. And you got to bring whatever gift and gifts you have. You don't have to bring someone else's gifts. You don't have to look for someone that has one particular thing. You know, any of the leaders, whether it's Rosa Parks or Fannie Lou Hamer or Martin Luther King, or whether it's Frederick Douglass or Sojourner Truth or Harriet Moses Tubman, you know, any of those folks, you know, had to be kind of prodded and reluctantly pushed into doing the work of justice. And so it's not that someone, you know, was born fully formed, like jumped out of the head of Zeus, you know, like Athena, that like ready to be in battle for justice. It's that, you know, no, like wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever gifts you got, you can bring them and they matter and you can make a difference. And don't let anyone tell you you can't.
Woman to that, right? And as they always say in the churches, I always love the signs that say, come as you are. Mm-hmm. Come as you are and bring everything with you.
Yeah.
We need it all.
We need it all.
Rev Liz, if people want to get in contact with you, the Kairos Center, what's happening? What's current? Talk to us.
So the Kairos Center is working on building a movement for today. And so a lot of the work we do is help to anchor the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And we have Poor People's Campaign chapters, committees in 40 states across the country.
Wow.
So no matter where you are, there are people that are like you, that are nothing like you at all, who are trying to work to establish, you know, justice here on earth. So please get involved. Please, please, please get involved. The Kairos Center also you know, has a spiritual online community for activists. Mm-hmm. It's called the Freedom Church of the Poor, and we have a Spanish language one called Iglesia del Pueblo. We have a bunch of Jewish leaders that have started a Freedom Shul of the Poor. But on Sundays at 6 p.m., please join us online on our Facebook or on various social media outlets to be a part of this kind of movement community for movement leaders. And then we also are doing lots of work out in the world and always need people to be involved. So folk can check out kairoscenter.org. Folk can find us on all the different socials. And people can connect with me on mine as well. I'm at Liz Theo for a whole bunch of different social media outlets. And, you know, what we believe is that a movement from the bottom up is possible and is growing, and it needs people from all walks of life. And so I really hope that people, and this is for, you know, the Poor People's Campaign and the work that the Kairos Center is doing. There are a lot of people of faith in the work, but there's also a lot of people that are not of particular faiths or no faith at all. And we believe that you know, the arc of the universe must bend towards justice. We have to bend it there, and so that we can gotta come together across all these different lines that divide us and build a movement that can build the kind of compelling power to realize justice for everyone. And so there's a role for everyone. I hope that folks will get involved.
Yeah, and I echo that. I don't care who you are.
That's right.
We all need you. This battle affects every single one of us. Rev Liz, I'm so proud of you, yo. I am just like, I'm honored, I'm grateful of all the work that, I still to this day remember when we went down south, the exposure that I got, And it really opened up my eyes to this day. Because this is what we do. And I tell people, I'm going to do this on my dying bed.
That's right.
Till I die.
That's
You
right.
feel me?
That's right.
As we always do to end the Know Thy Shelf podcast, we end with a quote. And this comes to us from Brother West. And I know you know this quote. Tenderness is what love feels like in private. And justice is what love looks like in public. Peace, family.
So.